Hello, and thank you for joining me today. My name is Bob Blue, and I'm the Vice President of Centerton Nursery. And if you didn't get to join us for our dealer day yesterday, we've decided to go ahead and re-record my talk on what's new for Spring 23 and post it to YouTube for all of our customers to see. We're going to talk about what we're bringing into the lineup, what we're dropping out, and why we're making the changes that we are. So let's get into it. So where do we find our products? Well, it's four main places. So we deal with about 25 or so young plant suppliers directly all across North America and in Europe. And some of those are dealt through with brokers that make deals for certain genetics, breeders and breeder reps if the breeders are overseas. Typically they'll have a representative here in the States that helps import those products. And also we do a little bit of travel around here and there and everywhere. Now that COVID is over, we're actually getting back to visiting these places again. So we go to California Spring Trials. We go to Wasco, California to view the Rose Trials every couple of years. Ballhort, Walters, they're all at least once a year trip. And then we have three little gems nearby. We have Star Roses and Plants in West Grove, PA, the Mount Cuba Center in Hockessin, and North Creek Nurseries in Landenberg, PA. These are all about an hour away from us, and honestly can all be hit up in about one good day's trip. If you're from this area and you've never been to Mount Cuba, it actually is a garden that you can visit, and it is truly a gem. They are basically existing for the preservation and promotion of native species of the mid-Atlantic area, and they do fantastic trials. They have great installations. The people that work there are wonderful. So if you've never been to Mount Cuba, when you're visiting Chanticleer and you're visiting Longwood, or you're visiting some of these other local gardens, you really should go visit Mount Cuba. Not every year, but every once in a great while, we will visit two different trade shows in Europe. In the summertime, in late August, you can go visit the Planetarium Show in Boskoop, Netherlands. Here you'll see a little bit of everything in terms of perennial and shrub growing, but it's much more production-based. If you find yourself in Western Germany in January, I don't know why, because the weather is absolutely dark, dreary, and dismal, but you can go visit the IPM show in Essen, which is one of the largest horticultural trade fairs in the world. And here they have everything from a robot that will plant your plants and stick your cuttings to every major container manufacturer, breeder, young plant supplier. Anybody that does business in hort in Europe will be at this show, and it is worth visiting at least once in your life. So we're going to dig right into some new plants. In caterpillar candy, we did move availability back starting in August 1st. We're now starting at July 1st. We're considering moving it even a little bit earlier. It seems like the consumer does want these products before the caterpillars are actively feeding. So we are trying to shift that production a little bit. We're also adding in some varieties where we know we can get consistent seed supply. And one of those additions is going to be Antonaria plantaginifolia. If there's a botanist out there that's watching this that's screaming at their screen right now, you are correct. Plantaginifolia actually does have a white flower, but I don't have a picture of that species yet. So this is a different species of Antonaria that looks exactly like it, except it's pink and not white. But this is one of the main host plants for the American lady butterfly caterpillar, which is what you see pictured here. Moving on to Chef Jeff. We have one new tomato for next year. It's called Blue Ribbon. It is an indeterminate slicer, medium size, probably 5 to 7 ouncer. This actually came to us from one of the gentlemen that helps us with the printing of the Chef Jeff tags. He's a fairly experienced gardener. He's always trying out some new things, trying to find something different to bring to the line. And this was the gem from his garden both last year and this year. And he thought, well, it's such a great performer, and also the name Blue Ribbon, you guys are already growing blue label perennials with a ribbon on it. You got to be growing tomato blue ribbon. So, in fact, we are adding this for next year. In the world of cantaloupe, we've been having trouble getting seed supplies of both 1776 and Gold Star for a number of years now, predating COVID. And COVID has not helped the supply chain on these two varieties. So we actually just decided to scrap them both and move to some newer genetics. So we're bringing in Athena to replace 1776 and Infinite Gold to replace Gold Star. They're both F1s. Both have a good disease and powdery mildew resistance package bred into them, and they're both pretty good performers. The reason Infinite Gold is going to be in the premium line, the seed is a little bit more expensive because it's actually bred for the production agriculture industry. So it's got a slightly higher yield and a slightly better shelf life once it's been picked. So because of that, it's going to be in that premium offering. So I'm sorry that I don't have a photo for this, but I do not have rights to distribute the photo of this plant on YouTube, so therefore I had to pull it out of my presentation for today. But we have two new items for the Taste of Italy lineup, which the sales continue to increase based on your demand. We are going to try to find some new things to add to this line. So the item that I don't have a photo of is a cucumber called Carasello Barese, which in Italian basically means a carousel in Bari. Bari is a city kind of near the top of the heel of Italy, but it is a cucumber. It looks kind of like a fairly light green cucumber. Only gets about 4 inches long. If you pick it around 2.5 to 3 inches, it's perfectly edible, tastes fine, tastes just like a cucumber. If you allow it to mature to its 4-inch mature size, it actually tastes something more like a bitter lemon sort of honeydew cucumbery flavor. As unappealing as I may have just made that sound, it actually is fairly tasty. And I thought it's totally unique. Why not bring it into the lineup? And then the picture that you can actually see on the left is Prospera largeleaf, which is a hybrid sweet basil. Comes from an Israeli breeding company called Genesis Seeds, and they've been breeding very extensively for a number of years into mildew-resistant sweet basil. And we all know if we've held on to sweet basil plants in our garden or in a pot for any amount of time, typically you start getting that mucky black stuff all over it. It eventually defoliates and eventually kills the plant. This photo was actually taken at an in-ground trial in early August of this year, and as you can see, it looks clean as a whistle. It was very mature, so it's not like it had just been planted there the day before. This plant was probably about 2 to 2.5 feet tall, but super pungent fragrance and flavor, super resistant to downy mildew, and fairly late to flower. You can see it is flowering, but not on every terminal. And obviously in August, you think on most basil plants, they just have flowers everywhere. So really high hopes for Prospera largeleaf basil. Into shrubs, azalea sales have been dipping for us for a number of years. And so rather than just trying to reinvent the wheel, we're going to throw an entirely new wheel at you and see how it rolls. So Azalea Perfectamundo is from the Proven Winners line. They are reblooming azaleas from more or less the same bloodline as Encore Azalea or the Flora More azaleas. It seems like everybody's got their own series of this breeding now. But there are more than 3 colors available. These are the 3 that we liked the most. They were the best performers in our trial. The one thing we don't know is how well they're going to sell. So it's fairly small quantities for next spring. They are expensive. We will be upfront about that. They are definitely not cheap, which unfortunately that's what a lot of the azalea market has moved to, is cheaper and cheaper all the time. But we're going to see if they sell. We're committed to growing the crop that we have coming for next spring and a crop following that up. And then based on your feedback and how fast that we sell through them will dictate whether or not we expand on them, grow more of them, or grow more variety. So time will tell on Perfectamundo. Here's one that's going to be a little bit controversial. It's a barberry. It is not sterile, but it is an absolutely electric plant. So if you were in one of our sales regions where you still can sell this product, this is going to be a winner. It is an upright, about 4 feet tall, 2 to 2.5 feet wide item, and that new growth, that electric orange-red growth, is eye-catching at any distance. We had a few in our new products display yesterday. They were definitely eye-catching. We had some prize giveaways where people could actually put flags in plants that they wanted to take with them. I believe these were the first 3 plants to go. So people are going to gravitate towards this. Again, I realize it's a problem. I have no idea if we're going to be selling it in 2 years when some more laws start to take effect. I have no idea if we're going to be selling any barberry in 2 to 5 years. But for the time being, we are, and this is an absolutely stellar selection of upright barberry. Buddleia birthday cake comes to us from our friends at Van Bell Nursery, Blue and Easy Plants. This was a late edition. You'll see that emblem in the corner of some of these slides, which means we acquired the rights to grow this or acquired the young plants after the catalog went to the printer in this past spring. But Buddleia birthday cake, it's got that name because the flowers look like candles that all point upright. For the most part, it's fairly fastigiate. Gets about 4 to 4.5, maybe 5 feet tall, about 2.5 to 3 wide. So it's much more of a tight side to side and taller upright than the super dwarf Buddleia that seem to be coming to the market right now. And we like it because, one, the flowers present beautifully. It's a very attractive flower color, and it also fills a spot where most Buddleia will not. You know, it'll work underneath a window, but not grow over top to cover the window and not take up such a big footprint that you can't plant anything around it underneath that window. So it's kind of a neat fitting into a different spot Buddleia, which is one of the reasons that we picked it up. For something new in the native shrub side of things, this Daravilla firefly is, in my mind, probably the best in this color range of Daravilla, in that chartreuse, lemon, lime foliage Daravilla. So it comes out in the spring with bronze orange new growth, and it matures to like a chartreuse, lemon, lime. That's that color that you see underneath it. This color was taken in late September, about this time of year last year, where the night started to cool down and you start to get that new growth starts to turn to a cherry red and eventually a burgundy, and it gives you an amazing multicolored effect. It does get yellow flowers like most Daravilla do, but the yellow really is not seen among the yellow foliage, so it's all about the foliage right here. A few new Hydrangea macrophylla. We have discontinued a bunch over the last few years. We dropped Bluebird, we dropped Preciosa, Firefly, Expression, Wedding Gown, just a lot of plants that weren't performing for us or not selling for you. And so we did a very extensive hydrangea trial both in 20 and 21, and so these are now the results of those trials. So Hydrangea Can Do is actually a Serrata hybrid, so I think it's about 75% Serrata breeding. So that gives it a couple of things. One is it makes it just a tad hardier. We think this is actually 5A, maybe even 4B zone hardy. It also gives you can see in there that burgundy touch to the foliage in cooler weather. It will go lavender to purple in acidic soil. This was taken in fairly alkaline soil, but that electric bubblegum pink is not bad either. It's a lace cap, but the outside flowers, the sterile flowers, get so big that it actually almost fills in and looks more like a mop head by the time the flowers mature. On the flip side, Hydrangea Skyview is brand spanking new to the market this coming year. Gets a very nice shade of blue, little hints of lavender. It can go bright pink, like a bubblegum pink, but we're going to try to keep ours as blue as possible. And these both come out, I should say, basically all the new hydrangeas from Proven Winners. I realize some of you, the white pot is controversial. Some of you don't care for it. But I have seen their hydrangea trialing program, and I believe it is probably the best in the country in terms of what they do to basically abuse these plants to make sure that under multiple different types of mistreatment that they will still bloom every single year for the consumer. And so my big push here when we got all these new gardeners in COVID, I'm going to stand on my soapbox for a minute, is the worst thing we can do is give them plants that they're going to be unsuccessful with. You know, you sell them this hydrangea with 50 flowers on it, they plant it in their yard and they don't see another flower for the next 3 years, and they rip it out and they say, well, that was a waste of money. I don't want to do that. I want to give the consumers product that they're going to love and cherish and make them want to come back and buy more. And so some of this hydrangea trialing is hopefully going to lead to that exact thing. So one more macrophylla from Proven Winners. This was, in my opinion, the shining star of our hydrangea trial. Wee Bit Giddy. It's a nice cherry red color. absolutely the heaviest flowering macrophylla I have ever had on this farm. And it looked like that without anything being done to it. It just kind of does its own thing. It's fairly dwarf, stays about 2.5 to 3 feet tall and wide, so the consumer shouldn't have to do much of anything to it and just enjoy that flower set year after year. On to Hydrangea paniculata. I realize that we have too many Hydrangea paniculata. We know this, and we are in fact dropping a number of them moving forward. We are dropping Quickfire, we are dropping Firelight, we are dropping Fire and Ice. I'm sure there's more in there that we are discontinuing. The reason being is there are some popular ones out there. There's plants like Little Lime, like Bobo that you guys want and you want in large numbers. But then there's also plants like pufferfish that we feel like if we have all of these varieties out there that really aren't the best performers in the world, or maybe they're not the best sellers, that plants like this will get missed or forgotten. What makes pufferfish special to me, not only is it very heavy flower set, I mean, you can kind of see in the peripheral of this photo that that's one plant with probably 24 flower heads on it. But the neat thing to me is when the flower head matures and gets to its finished state, it actually pushes a new branch, and you can see that coming out. It pushes a new branch right out of the top of the panicle and starts to flower again. So you actually get almost like a double flower set, one following the other, and it makes for a very interesting texture, a very extended bloom season, and overall a very good performing plant. And so we hope that pufferfish doesn't get forgotten in the sea of Hydrangea paniculata on the marketplace. Another late addition from Bloom and Easy Plants, this is Hydrangea corsifolia toy soldier. We all know and love Snow Queen. It's been on the market for well longer than I've been alive. I think the plant patent number expired 25 years ago. But the one thing that is a downfall for Snow Queen, especially in a container when we need to sell it at retail, is it gets a little wonky. The branches can kind of meander around. It can't hold up the flowers very well if you have it in flower in retail. And so Toy Soldier was made as a selection to try to fix that. So the flowers on this stay fairly upright. The stems are very sturdy. And it kind of stands there kind of like a little toy soldier, which is kind of what we want when we present products to the consumer. We want them to look tidy. We want them to look well maintained because that's the way the consumer wants them to look in the landscape. And so above and beyond just having a really nice flower that stands up in weather and stands up over time, it does have some pretty spectacular burgundy fall foliage. So you get a multi-season enjoyment out of this plant. Physocarpus tiny wine is not new to the industry. It is new to us. We've pretty much figured out that you guys really need about 3, maybe 4 varieties of Physocarpus. You need basically about 60% of what we sell is going to be some sort of red or orange to red variety, be it Lady in Red or ginger wine. Then you need a couple gold and you need a couple dwarf, and this fills that need for a dwarf. This is the best one we could come up with. It is a very nice plant. It still does get some size to it, 3 to 4 feet tall and wide, so it's definitely not a super dwarf plant, but it does have a smaller leaf, a softer texture, and I would say on a per cubic inch of size, it actually is one of the heavier blooming Physocarpus that we've ever tested here. So again, not new to the industry, but it does help round out our Physocarpus offering. Years ago, we had tried some Potentilla, some alternative color, non-yellow Potentilla from some different breeders in Europe, and we just couldn't keep them alive. I don't know if it was our soil mix or if it was our hot and humid summers. I'm going to assume it was the hot and humid summers, but they just could not survive long enough to make saleable plants. And so we scrapped that program. And in walks our proven winners rep. He says, I've got great Potentilla. You gotta have all of these. And I said, well, I will trial all of these. I will not take them all sight unseen. And there was, I believe, 4 colors. I think there was a yellow, a white, like an amber yellow, and the pink. And honestly, the pink was the one I had the least amount of hopes for, because typically, if anybody remembers Pink Beauty, Pink Beauty was kind of a whisper pink for about 12 minutes and then turned beige. And besides that, the plant was a dog. Well, here comes this plant to knock my socks off. This was the only one out of the bunch that we thought was worth a darn, and not only is it worth a darn, it's fantastic. It's heavier flowering than Goldfinger. The flowers are not minuscule. They've got some good size on it. They hold their color for a very long time. I mean, this thing is really a genuinely great plant. So I realize it's potentilla. It's not a product that consumers are walking in the door begging you for, but I do know this, that it will be eye-catching at retail, and this plant will sell. A couple new interesting conifers. I really think that the dwarf conifer is going to make a comeback here because of their low care habits. You know, basically a set it and forget it type plant that also brings some different texture, some multi-season appeal to the landscape. So here's two new dwarf arborvitae both from proven winners: Anna's Magic Ball, the yellow on the left, Tater Tot, the dwarf green on the right. They both get about 18 to 24 inches tall and wide with age, and I'm saying with age like years and years age. We're actually going to be selling these in a 1-gallon container, but they're super adorable. And again, they're set it and forget it plants. These are plants that, as long as it's a sunny spot and doesn't have super wet soils, these plants will perform for consumers without any input from them for years on end. And one more through your North Pole. I don't know what to call this. Is it an improved emerald green? Is it an emerald green on steroids? It will get about 10 to 15 feet tall, so it is a good neighbor hider. It definitely stays much tighter than emerald green. I think it has a much more improved shape. It's pyramidal rather than blobby that emerald green tends to get. It will get a central leader, which emerald green will not do. So is it going to be a #1 seller? No, but it is a phenomenal plant. I do think it has a place in the retail marketplace. Weigela is another one of those genus that I feel like there's 12 new Weigela every year, and we definitely don't need but maybe 1 or 2 of them, if that. But we do have a couple new ones for 23 that we really like. One of them is from Bloom and Easy. This is Afterglow. It's a unique flower in that it opens up a kind of a saturated pink and matures to almost a whisper of pink. And so you get that yesterday, today, tomorrow look, that multicolored look of the young bud, the mature flower, and the aging flower over top of that green to bronze foliage. It's much more chocolatey burgundy in cooler climates, and then somewhat greenish bronze in the summertime, and then takes on that more bronze chocolate in the fall again. So multi-season appeal. Nice and tight, 4 to 5 feet, but it doesn't get super rangy or leggy like a lot of Weigela do, so I do have high hopes for this one. And for something a little bit more on the dwarf side, into that 2.5 to 3 feet size, this is Weigela Very Fine Wine. This is an improvement over the original Fine Wine, which got a little bit leggy. You know, it would send those rogue branches out here and there, and it wouldn't bloom all that heavy at any one time. And this plant solves both of those problems. It's a much more maintainable shape and a much heavier blossom set in the springtime. On to perennials. We had astilbe cappuccino a couple of years ago, and then we lost our supply. This is from the same breeder. Mochaccino is a slightly taller, about 2.5 feet tall, of these arching and waving in the wind white flowers, held on like kind of a burgundy red stem over top of deep, deep, deep green foliage, which really offsets the white flower. So we're actually going to get both of this and cappuccino moving forward, and whichever one is the better of the two is going to be the one we go with. My gut tells me it's going to be mochaccino because they're from the same breeder, and this was the second to be released about 2 years after cappuccino was. So keep an eye out for this one coming in spring. But these are the astilbe that really blew me away in our trials last year. There were 3 in this series. We have 2 for next year. The third will be coming in 2025, we think. This is the You and Me series. There's You and Me Always, You and Me Together, and hopefully in a year or 2 we'll have You and Me Forever. So they're Chinensis breeding, very strong stemmed, very chunky, dense flowers. Much more impressive flower set on a young plant than anything else we have in Chinensis breeding. So there you get good sun resistance, can basically take a full day of sun, probably do best with a little bit of dappled afternoon shade, but fantastic landscape presence with a nice 18 to 24 inch flower spike of just saturated color, and just great for cut flower. They'll hold up in a vase, great for a border, great for a sunny group, great for a container probably. So I just think I have really high hopes for the You and Me series of astilbe. One new baptisia to add to our offering brings us up to 5, and we realized that the 4 that we had, none of those 4 were that classic indigo purple blue. So we actually did a trial of a handful of them. This happened to be the one we liked the best. Blueberry Sunday is part of the Proven Winter Perennial program, but we chose it because it's fairly compact, about 2.5 feet tall, and it's very heavy flowering, and also that purple color, that purple blue color, was just grabbing us. You know, even looking at a sea of all these new baptisia, there were all these fancy shades of blue and purple. This was the one that really caught our eye, so it's the one we're moving forward with. 2 really late editions. They should have the late edition tag on it, but I must have missed it. This is a new edition for the autumn editions line for next year. This is Coreopsis Fall Sensation Vermilion and Fall Sensation Quartz, both verticillata breeding, both from Doomen Orange in Holland, but they were bred specifically for late season sales. So it's almost like they were bred perfectly for this program. So they have nice large flowers, probably like an 1.5-inch flower, which is much larger than most of the verticillata that we sell now. And very bold colors, you know, that nice, that bright magenta pink with a yellow eye, and that saturated, almost oxblood red. I have really high hopes for these. I actually did not expect much from them, but we said, sure, we trial them. And we actually just selected these for the lineup earlier this week. So this is a very late edition. A new color for hardy dianthus. This is Funky Fuchsia from Proven Winter Perennials. This is what I wrote in our catalog this year, eye-piercing color. So the photo does it absolutely no justice. It is an electric fuchsia, fully double carnation-looking dianthus, but it's zone 5 hardy, and it'll actually grow in most gardens where dianthus will grow. So I really can't ask for much more than that. It does impress both from near and afar. I can't say enough good things about this. It will not give you that full canopy of flower like you'd expect from, say, like a Kahori or a different type like an Eastern Star or Vivid Bright Light dianthus, but they're very large flowers, probably like 1.5 inch flowers, and again, it is a color break. For hardy dianthus, I've never seen anything quite like it. But if you want that edge-to-edge bloom look, we have 2 new dianthus for next year. There's Lip Gloss and Red Rouge, both from Hans Hansen breeding at Walters Gardens. Both fantastically beautiful flowers, both up close and afar, and both give you that solid carpet of color look. Neither of these will rebloom heavily. They will a little touch, but where they really shine is that April-May bloom window, and so it's going to hit peak color at peak retail, and so I think they're going to be an easy sell for you. And here's something completely out of left field. This is Dianthus I Love You. It comes to us from a company called Selecta, and they're actually breeding dianthus more for houseplants. I was visiting a friend last spring, in spring of 21, and they had this plant on her kitchen counter. And I said, what is that? And she says, I bought it at a local garden center. They said it's a houseplant dianthus. So I go digging down in the plant. Sure enough, I find a tiny little tag, Dianthus I Love You. I said, oh, I've never even heard of this. Reason being, houseplant dianthus typically are not on my radar. So I got a hold of a friend that knows somebody at Selecta, and they said, well, it is zone 6 hardy. It will survive in the ground where most dianthus will grow. It's just not hardy below zone 6. I said, I can live with that. So I said, send me some trial plants. And so this is what came out of that trial. This is a photo I snapped on my cell phone this past spring, and it is absolutely positively stunning. Yes, I know it's not super hardy. However, it will survive as a houseplant and stay in flower for the better part of a month, month and a half. So even just in that value alone, I think it's worth it. We're going to be selling this as a quart product. And in zone 6 and warmer, it will transition to the garden just like any other dianthus would. But you get almost magenta flower buds opening up to just a whisper of beigey pink mature flowers. Again, that multicolored yesterday, today, tomorrow look that we just think is such a striking way to present product at retail. So everybody knows Dicentra spectabilis. You know, it's in your grandmother's garden. It's in my grandmother's garden at least. It's a fairly low care perennial. If you give it 2 to 3 feet of width and height and a little bit of dappled shade, a little bit of moisture, it's probably going to grow for you for years to come. A few years back, we were able to introduce Dicentra valentine, which is the dark red variety, and this is Cupid, which is a lighter pink variety. So it's more of a very soft bubblegum pink flower. Fairly striking, fairly similar to spectabilis in every way, except the flower color is a much lighter shade of pink. And so with the success that we've seen from Valentine, we thought that this was probably a no-brainer. Coneflower is another one. There's too many of them out there. We've dropped a handful. We've dropped most of the doubles outside of the few that really performed well for us. We dropped a lot of singles that were either production issues or just weren't selling. But the artisans are selling and growing in popularity. If you don't know, the artisan series comes from Keith Seed. And yes, I said seed. So these are actually seed strain echinacea that are not your typical white or magenta purple kinds of coneflower. So we brought out artisan red ombre and soft orange a few years back, and this is the latest color to come out of that breeding. So this is yellow ombre. If you look at the picture on the left, that is actually soft orange in the background of that photo, so you can see the difference in color. It is a great performer. It is mostly purpurea breeding, so it is fairly hardy. We're going to say zone 5 on this one, and it's fairly low care and a great pollinator attractor. The one thing I will say, because it is from seed, you will see variation. So the reason I put these two photos on there, the photo on the left shows you there is some variation of height. Most of them are going to be around 24 inches. There's a few that are going to be 20. There's a few that are going to be 30 to 32. But most of them are going to kind of come in around 30 inches. In terms of flower size, most of them are going to be in that 4-inch range. There's a couple that are going to be bigger, a couple that are going to be smaller. But in terms of consistency within a seed strain, this is very, very good. And all 3 of the artisan colors have been good in that regard. We cleaned house on a bunch of Heuchera over the past few years. Now we're starting to bring some new varieties back into the fold. We had Heuchera Big Top Caramel years ago. It was actually just a chemically induced tetraploid, in other words, a gene split of the classic caramel, and that disappeared from the market. We don't know if it was an issue with the patent of just being a chemically induced tetraploid of the same thing and trying to patent it. We don't know if it was an issue in tissue culture, but for some reason that plant went away. And now that bloodline has kind of come back around in a new form, a newly bred form called Big Top Caramel Apple. It's basically the old classic caramel with just a little bit more vigor, a puckered leaf, so you get that sort of crinkled leaf, and a much better contrast between the new foliage, which is that dark orange color, to the fully mature foliage, which is the lighter amber that you see at the bottom of that plant. But fantastic multicolored display and very low care with good vigor and great heat resistance for summer. Heuchera Black Forest Cake is from Terra Nova. This was actually suggested to us from an industry friend who said she felt like it was one of the most striking color contrasts she's ever seen on a Heuchera, with those bright raspberry cherry flowers and that dark, almost obsidian black foliage. And I mean, it really does set off one another really well. So it is fairly on the compact side, so it's going to be a 1 gallon only on this item, but it is very, very striking in a container and in the landscape. I'm sure many of you are familiar with the Heuchera Carnival series from Darwin Perennials. We used to grow one called Candy Apple. It looked great in the spring. It had a pink to apple red new growth, but as soon as the nights warmed up and your days got a little longer, it kind of turned greeny brown bronze, which was not very attractive. This, however, the cold season growth is almost like a cherry red, and this is the warmer season growth. This photo was taken, I believe, in late May, so 80-degree days, 65 to 70-degree nights. where it takes on more of a cinnamon to amber to orange pink sort of color range. So, out with the old, in with the new, just a slight improvement over the previous cultivar that really only looked good in the cooler seasons. Here's another one of those out of left field plants. This is Heuchera frilli. This comes from a small breeder in Europe. It is a dwarf. It only gets about 12 inches tall and wide, maybe a little bit wider, 14 maybe. But it has such a crinkled leaf that it almost folds over on top of itself, almost giving you like a broccoli or loose cauliflower look to it, kind of like a marmalade on steroids. Obviously has some Velosa breeding in the background. If I had to guess, probably has some caramel breeding in the background, considering it's a very similar color palette that it displays. The new growth is greenish amber with a red underside, magenta underside, and matures to an amber orange. But just a really cool look for, I've seen it in mixed containers, I've seen it in a shaded border. It looks really unique and neat. It just brings a totally different texture to the shaded garden. And another out with the old, in with the new. We dropped Heuchera silver scrolls years ago. One, because it didn't flower, but really the bigger problem is once it got warm, it just simply did not hold up to the heat and humidity. Smoke and Mirrors is new breeding, new bloodline, and a completely different presentation of that silver-leafed Heuchera, in that the silver is really, really bright silver. The undersides, you can kind of see at the upper right-hand corner of the right-hand photo, that almost burgundy purple on the underside of the leaves. So if you have it up in a container, you get to see both the front and the back of the leaf, so you get great color contrast. But the photo on the left was actually taken around August 1st, and there in heat and humidity, probably heat pushing 90 degrees, it's still smiling, throwing flowers, foliage is standing up to the heat. I really can't say enough good things about Heuchera Smoke and Mirrors, and we've been looking at this plant. I think the photo on the right was taken probably 4 years ago, so we're finally getting the supply in place to offer this one to you. One new perennial, hibiscus, for next year. This is probably one of the most dwarf ones we'll ever have offered. Edge of Night only gets about 3 to maybe 3.5 feet tall. I should preface, burgundy leaf dwarf, one of the smallest burgundy leaf dwarfs we've ever sold, because we do some seed ones that stay really tight and tidy, but they're all green. And quite frankly, based on the sales that you guys are showing us, burgundy leaf perennial hibiscus are where the market needs to be, because you can sell them. They look good in May when they break dormancy. They look great in August when they're flowering. They basically will look good from, a month after frost to a month before frost. And so that longer sales window is really where the market is moving for perennial hibiscus. And Edge of Night is super compact, but also very saturated burgundy foliage. And it's one of those jump out of the landscape and grab you types of plants. If you were at Dealer Day last year and you heard my talk, you learned that the Hosta market has completely been upended by COVID and continues to be an issue. Most of the Hosta in the world actually come from a handful of labs, tissue culture labs that is, that are all in China. Most of them had to shut down multiple times because of COVID restrictions. Some of them had major crop failures in amongst that. And so what happens in the midst of that is Hosta take, about 2 to 2.5 years from when the tissue culture is initiated to when we can actually sell the product to you. Some of it's closer to 3 to 3.5 years, depending on the type of variety. So because of hiccups along the way over almost a 2-year period, we may be another 12 to 18 months before the supply chain of Hosta starts to settle down. Because of that, we've had to reach out to some new breeders, some new varieties, and some new suppliers to try and make sure that we have Hosta enough to sell you guys. Hosta is one of our largest selling single genera, and we want to have the offering both in width of availability and depth of availability so that you guys have a great offering to sell to your retail consumers come springtime. So with that, we brought in Fantabulous. It comes from the same person that was giving us Wolverine, so it's that long, slender leaf. It's also very early to break for Wolverine. We're not getting out of Wolverine, but we're definitely not going to have it for 23, and probably won't have it for 24 either. So in the meantime, we will have Fantabulous. If it's a great performer, we'll keep it. Stained glass and fire and ice, they are not new to the industry. In fact, we grew fire and ice years ago, and then we lost our supply because of virus issues. So we're getting back into both of those varieties, and we're also bringing back Francis Williams. You guys are still asking for it, and it still shows up on a lot of job sheets. So why not offer it? So you're going to see some overturn in our Hosta offering over the next year or two, possibly. And we're hoping by summer or spring of 26, which I know seems a really long way away, at that point in time, we might actually be in a rhythm of these are the hosta that we can offer, and we can offer them with a good depth of availability. So anyway, that's where we stand on hosta. Leucanthemum spun silk, also from the Walters Gardens breeding program for proven winter perennials. Possibly the largest flowering leucanthemum that I've ever personally seen that is worth growing. It's mildew resistant, which is one of our biggest problems with leucanthemum here. We've killed tons of leucanthemum trials, which is why we trial them here, because they will get mildew and they will melt and they will die the first time they see a dew point above 65. So this has gone through that issue. It does not have that problem here. And the flower, despite being an unusual form of those thin, wispy petals, the flowers are easily 4.5 to 5 inches across. The one there at the bottom middle of that photo actually held in my hand. It was bigger than my hand. So probably closer to a 6.5 to 7 inch flower. I was told that was kind of an anomaly, but still the flowers are huge, probably twice the volume of a Becky's Shasta. You know, for years, the only lupine we grew was a seed mixture called Gallery. We still sell it now in quarts and gallons, and it's fine. But it's a mix. You get a mix of colors, you get a mix of habits, a mix of heights, a mix of everything. And then comes along the West Country series of lupines that are bred to be selected and grown in tissue culture, true to name, so that every variety is just that variety, and you get consistency from one plant to the next. The latest in this series is Polar Princess. It's a green bud that opens to an ivory white, and I can't say enough good things about this series. They've all been winners. We've had success with every single color, every single variety. They're vigorous, they're fairly low care, and they just perform. And so we thought, well, if this is the newest color, yes, it's white. White's not everybody's favorite, but it does help round out that offering, and it's that same vigor and the same stunning flower that you'd come to expect from a West Country lupine. All right, so the photos coming here in a second, guys, but there's a story behind this one. I can say that this phlox is divaricata, so a woodland native. We sell phlox Blue Moon in quarts. It's a great little low care, great shade perennial. Gets those purpley blue flowers in late spring. And I had a meeting with a breeder representative friend of mine at Cultivate. And we get done talking, and he asked, and what should I tell my breeders? Like, what are you looking for? And I said, you know what, Phlox divaricata is sort of like a forgotten about species. It's a good little plant, and I don't see anybody doing much work in it. And so he turns around real quick, he grabs his phone, he starts scrolling through photos, and then he shows me this. And I was floored. It's basically Phlox Blue Moon, but with a variegated leaf. And then he showed me another photo that I don't have access to, and he says this is what it looks like in springtime when the foliage is coming out. Instead of being yellow variegated, it's almost magenta pink. And so as the nighttime temps warm up, the variegation changes from pink to creamy yellow, and then the flowers come up above that. So this is going to be fairly limited next year. Hopefully by 24 we'll get a better supply of it. But I ordered it sight unseen, just based on this photo, because it is an absolute knockout. And I really look forward to having this offered to sale. I mean, how many native perennials do you see that looks like that? It's you could probably count them on one hand. So that's coming down the pipe. And it just so happens from the same breeder representative, Tiarella Angel Wings, probably the heaviest blooming pink tiarella that we've ever seen. It has a nice center blotch of burgundy on the foliage, but the real showstopper is that bud count. I mean, that is an 8-inch pot. And look at the flowers on that thing. I could just stare at this photo for a very long time. This is going to replace sugar and spice because, quite frankly, you don't need them both, and this is the better of the two. And so this is going to be probably our best-selling tiarella moving forward. Few new Veronica. We've dropped a bunch over the last few years. We dropped Unique Pink. We dropped Bubblegum Candles. We dropped a few before that. And then this comes kind of out of an oddball place. I didn't really know what to expect from it because I was told up front, they're like, well, it grows a little wonky. The candles don't stay straight. They sort of bend and curve at their own will. I said, okay, well, let's see what it looks like. That color is fantastic. It's a soft lavender blue, almost a periwinkle blue. It's a color that we do not have on Veronica, at least Veronica that's not a cut flower Veronica that gets 3 feet tall. Ever After stays about 18 to 20 inches tall. And the flowers you can see they kind of curve and contort a little bit, but I actually kind of find that attractive. And that color is just one of those things that just grabs you. I mean, it's just a stunningly beautiful color. You couldn't ask for much more from a Veronica. And it is very good in our mildew trials. The shining star of our mildew trials, however, was this one. This is Purple Leia. It's from the same breeder that brought us Lavender Lightsaber and Blue Skywalker. These are plants that performed great in ground, but we could not keep the mildew off of them in pots. And quite frankly, if they don't look good in a pot, we're not going to ship them to you because then you can't sell them in a pot. So we've decided to just do overwintering trials on all of our Veronica. If they don't come through late spring without mildew, then we're not adding them. And honestly, I had very low hopes for this, knowing that its bloodline was related to ones that we struggled with. But this was the one out of, I think, 8 varieties that we trialed this year that was just clean as a whistle. It was the last to bloom. This didn't bloom until basically mid-June. So it's going to be about 3 weeks later than your Royal Candles types. But my goodness, the flower count, the clean foliage, the stature that it has, the fact that it's completely upright without being pinched. So many things have it going for this plant that I'm really excited to offer to you next year. Sedges are becoming more popular. You know, the Everest, Everglow, Everillo, those have been fantastic. They come from breeding out of Ireland. This is a different bloodline. This is Carex Feather Falls. Still very striking variegated foliage, but a lot more vigor than the Evercolor series. Probably could fill a 10-inch container if you really wanted to. We're still selling it in a gallon. It just has that lovely mop head look to it. Looks great in a container. It looks stellar in a landscape because it fills a nice space in a shaded border, a dry shade border really well. But I think the place that this is going to shine is either a spiller in a large mixed container or just a mono by itself in an 8 or 10-inch container sitting on somebody's porch or patio in the shade. It is really a knockout plant for a grass. I mean, how excited can you get about a grass? This is a really nice plant. We unfortunately lost our clematis supplier this year. They actually stopped growing clematis and started growing cannabis for the medical industry. So I guess there's more money in pot than there is in clematis. But regardless, we had to seek out and find a new supplier. So we tried some sample plants from a number of different growers. We settled on one that had the highest quality of input plant and also had the varieties we were looking for. And along with that came some varieties that we hadn't yet offered. 2 of which, Bees Jubilee and Nellie Moser, nothing new to the industry, but they will be new to us. Wester Plate is going to fill the need of Heuchera, which is a variety we only had for 2 years, unfortunately. It was a really cool red to burgundy tone. So this is not quite as deep a red, but is a very saturated violet purple. So we are a big fan of this, and it was very vigorous and with a really good bud count. And we also decided to trial a few clematis from proven winners. So I think we had 5 or 6 varieties, and these 2 we're the real performers. Viva Polina we selected because the flower's large, probably 5.5 to 6 inches across, and a very striking color combination. And Happy Jack, again, was one of those ones that just surprised us. We really didn't expect much from it, but man, is it heavy flowering. You know, if there was one problem that Jack Manna had, is just comes in and out of flower in a hurry, and it doesn't have the best vigor in the world. This actually solves both those problems. It was very vigorous, probably one of the most vigorous ones we had in the trial, and man, did it perform with flowers for weeks on end. So we just thought, well, we really, we almost have no choice but to move forward with these. One new lavender to add to the Stone Cottage Farm line. This is Eternal Elegance. This is from Doom and Orange breeding in Holland. It is a Zone 5 hardy angustifolia type. I think there's some different breeding in the background, but they're selling it as angustifolia, and we do know that it has overwintered in Zone 5. It's being trialed in Zone 4 this winter, so maybe we'll change that for next year. Blooms well without vernalization, and unfortunately, I had a different photo in there for our dealer day yesterday, but I didn't have the rights to it for YouTube. But it was a photo taken at the Penn State Trials in Landisville, Pennsylvania. And the reason I used that photo and not my own was that we had a sample plant here that looked identical to the photo that was taken in August at the Penn State Trials. And it just goes to show that we grew it, watered it, fertilized it, took care of it the way we would take care of any other lavender. And there it is in the ground in South Central Pennsylvania, being neglected, irrigated, and that's about it. And they looked identical to one another. So that tells me that it's a performer. And if it performs that well for us in a container and in an in-ground trial where it's not getting babied every day, then it's going to perform for the consumer. And also because it blooms without vernalization in that Stone Cottage package, it's going to look really good coming into flower basically from early mid-May through July. And last but certainly not least, Captain Miro Calla Lily. We switched over all of our calla lilies to the Capitan family in Holland. We were struggling with getting true to name calla lilies from other suppliers. You know, they'd sell them to us by color. We get, dwarf orange, dwarf magenta, dwarf pink. And so that's the way we had to sell them. We didn't know if the dwarf pink we were selling this year was the same one as last year. Most of the time it wasn't. But with Capitan, they're all the same every year. If they tell us we're getting Captain Miro, we're getting Captain Miro. If they tell us we're getting Captain Beretta, we're getting Captain Beretta. So that's why we've headed in this direction with this bloodline. And they're great plants. And it showed this past year, both in the way they grew, how consistently they finished, and how well they sold for both us and you. And so we thought, well, let's help round out that series with another color. And so this is like a magenta lavender with almost a white pickety edge. So a very stunning flower, a great plant besides. And for what it's worth, these are overwintering in my yard. I'm in the border of zone 6 and 7. I know I'm going to get a winter one of these years. It's going to come through and smoke them. But for the time being, they are great performing plants. And so I look forward to adding Captain Miro to our lineup of calla lilies. And I know it says questions, question mark, but if you have any questions about any of these plants, feel free to reach out to your representatives or reach out to us here in the office, or go ahead and throw a comment here on the video on YouTube. So I appreciate your time today. I hope you got something out of this, and I hope everyone has a wonderful winter, and let's get ready for spring.